Hello, Mr. Ramaswamy. It's good to see you again. I guess we have two streams of conversation to undertake today. The first pertains directly to a new book that you're releasing on September 24th, Truths, The Future of America First. And I think we'll use that as a springboard for a more general discussion. One of the agreements we made about a year ago was that you would check in with regular updates with regards to the progression of your presidential candidacy, which has come to an end, but there's many things to discuss with regard to its conclusion and to everything you've learned and to what the future pathway looks like, let's say, in a Trump administration, what role you might play in that, and how you construe that in general. But let's start with your book. Tell us about Truths, The Future of America First.
Yeah, so it's one of the things, and it's great to see you again, by the way, because we have mostly kept that pledge, and I think it's been it's been a fun forcing function for me to also, in conversations like this, to take some space and reflect on what has been still a life-changing journey. And I've enjoyed each of these times when I've been able to check in, and to give myself that space has been useful. This book was one of the things that gave me that occasion for reflection as well. So I left the campaign at the start of this year, and one of the core tenets of my campaign, the slogan was truth, actually, but it caused me to reflect more deeply on, okay, what did that actually mean? And what are the stakes for the future of this movement that I ran my presidential campaign as part of the America First movement? What is the future of that movement, and how does it relate to the pursuit of truth? And so that's what this book is about. It goes through 10 simple, hard truths, and I can tell you what some of those are. But it's a little bit different than the books that I've written in the past. I wrote Woke Inc., which actually was our first basis to get to know one another, that first book. And this is my fourth book I've written in the last 3 years, but this one's different in that it's not actually an academic exposition of any kind. It doesn't pretend to be. It's designed to equip people with the kinds of points they can use in dinner table talking point conversation with friends on the left who they otherwise may not be interacting with. Because I think one of the premises of the book is not just the content of it, but the methodology of how we get our country back, I think, is going to be through more open dialogue that we're not having amongst even friends and even family members for whom certain cultural or political topics have gone beyond the pale. And so each chapter ends with 5 hard points or facts that you took away from that chapter. I've never written a book that had that type of character to it, as opposed to maybe more intellectual or academic bent. But I think that this actually may be the most useful of the books that I will have written, I hope, because it would arm a lot of everyday citizens who agree with the points that I make in the book, but may not have been able to distill them in ways that allow them to talk to their friends on the left or friends who are outside of political interest, to be able to start the conversations at the dinner table that we're otherwise not having. So it's not quite a how-to book, but it does have an element of guiding people to have difficult conversations with friends. And I think that's a crucial part of this, with friends who they otherwise might have experienced distance with. That's part of what this book hopes to accomplish as well.
Can we walk through some of those truths? Do you want to detail some of them out so that people have a more clear understanding of what it is? And also explain to us why you selected and focused on those?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is God is real. And I'll go straight down the list of some of these. God is real.
Yeah, do that.
There are 2 genders. The climate change agenda is a hoax. That's an adaptation of what I used in my campaign, that fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Another one is that reverse racism is racism. Another is that an open border is not a border. Another is that in a democracy, the people we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Or as I phrase it in the book, there are 3 branches of government in the United States, not 4. That's actually probably one of the most important chapters of the book, albeit the one that gets the most technical. Another one is that nationalism isn't a bad word. And that's a chapter whose thesis is that the elected leaders of a nation, including the United States, owe their first moral duty to the citizens of their nation. So that explores, I think, a lot of the themes relating to the future of America First. There's a chapter entitled Facts Are Not Conspiracies. And, again, these truths are written in the chapter that follows that is the U.S. Constitution is the strongest and greatest guarantor of freedom in human history. Another chapter explores the importance of the nuclear family. I make the claim in the book that the nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. So it gives you a sense for the kinds of truths that I expose in this book. They're the kinds of things that, had I said these things in the 1990s when I grew up in the American Midwest, I would have advised you to not buy this book because they would have been too obvious, right? The things that are so obvious, they would have been banal to say. The irony is now in the year 2024, many of those statements are controversial for the same reasons that they were banal 30 years ago. And I think it is when the obvious becomes controversial that it is really a reminder of how far we've fallen as a country. But I think that part of the approach of the book isn't to be angry about it, but to offer, let's just take the climate change agenda as a hoax chapter, for example. That's one that I think will, and already amongst the people who have had these conversations does, make a lot of people upset when they hear that framing. Are you claiming that climate change or the idea of it is a hoax? No, I say the climate change agenda is a hoax because whether climate change is real or not is the wrong question. And the chapter, I think, if I may say so, goes somewhat logically through not independently conducted research. I'm not a climate scientist, but amalgamating into the research of a lot of people who have made this their life's work to go through the different questions underlying climate change, right? First of all, are global surface temperatures going up? That's a reasonable question to ask. The answer appears to be yes. Is that related to man-made causes? There's evidence suggesting that the answer to that question may be yes. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, is there clear evidence or any evidence to suggest that that would propose an existential risk to mankind or the future of humanity? And that's where I believe the answer is no, against the backdrop of hard facts that the book exposes from other researchers that have highlighted, folks you've talked to, even Bjorn Lomborg, for example, has highlighted 8 times as many people die from cold temperatures as warm ones. Well, then how do we synthesize that to a dinner table conversation that somebody's able to have with their friends who believe that climate change is the single most important issue that needs to be addressed, while not being a denier of the fact that global surface temperatures are going up, because they are, but getting to the heart of the matter of whether that actually has an adverse impact on the future of humanity. So that's the kind of thing I try to do chapter by chapter in the book.
Right. Well, that's part of that is-ought problem. I mean, we've been enjoined repeatedly over the past years to defer to the experts, but that deference presupposes that any given set of facts immediately displays for your perusal a set of policies that should be intelligently implemented. And part of the problem with that hypothesis is, well, there's many problems with it, but one of the major ones is balance of risk, let's say. I mean, one of the things that we did that was so catastrophic in our COVID panic was to prioritize a small potential increment in health over every other possible concern, short and long term, and what would you say, abdicate any political responsibility whatsoever with regard to balancing those risks. And that certainly applies on the climate side, as even if there is a risk, the question is, well, what is the risk precisely, and what could we do to ameliorate it, and what would be the risks of that amelioration? Like the large-scale transformation of the entire industrial enterprise is no minor undertaking. And it's not at all obvious, as you point out, and even by the IPCC's own recognition, that that is the primary existential threat that confronts human beings. I mean, even on the environmental side. And so, and this is completely independent of the reality of climate change, which I think is also questionable, and the potential danger of carbon dioxide, which in my way of thinking has not been convincingly established, especially given the massive data showing that carbon dioxide produces global greening, especially in semi-arid areas. And it's a greening increase of 20%. Like, when I look at this data as a scientist, and I am a scientist, I think that data point is so overwhelming, 20% increase in greening, especially in semi-arid areas, accompanied by a quite dramatic increase in crop productivity. It's like that single data point overshadows the significance of all the other data points as far as I can tell. And that's only one potential problem. Okay, so you
if I may just on the climate point, just because this is near and dear to my heart as well, and it is an example of what I strive to do in this book, where folks like yourself are able to go into the actual hard data points and form your own conclusions. But for the everyday citizen, that often people who have other callings may not have the same background that you do. That can be a difficult thing to do when much of what you're served up comes through the filter of intermediary sources that actually are in many ways bastardizing their so-called synthesis of the underlying research. So what I try to do here is at least demarcate several categories of questions. The first you raised is, I think, one that many people are at least comfortable now with broaching. The idea that, okay, even if climate change represents some kind of risk, is the cure worse than the disease? That's the COVID-19 analogy. And I contend with that, but that is well-trodden ground. But one of the things I try to do in this book, and for example, in this chapter of the book as well, is to go beyond just that well-trodden, accepted trade-off debate to actually even a deeper question of, forget the costs of intervention. Are we certain, or do we even have a basis to believe that a net increase of a small amount of global surface temperatures is indeed a bad thing for humanity, period? This irrespective of the question of intervention, right? Because many people say that, we still need fossil fuels, we still need that, and the cost of that, even though climate change is going to be bad for humanity, the cost of that would exceed the benefits. That's one argument. That's a totally separate argument, but an important one, from the question of whether or not carbon dioxide aided or abetted increases in global surface temperatures of under 2 degrees Celsius over the course of a century is bad or good. And it turns out there are some effects that are arguably bad for humanity. There are other effects which are more convincingly potentially net positive for humanity, such as the fact that more people die of cold temperatures than warm ones, such as the fact that the Earth is actually covered by more green surface area, as you noted, than it was even a century ago, especially in semi-arid areas, as you're right to note. And then there's the deeper question of going even upstream of that. So are we sure this is net bad for humanity? Then there's the question of, are we even sure that carbon dioxide is even the cause of the said phenomenon in the first place, when it's actually a much smaller percentage of the atmosphere, when we have relatively low levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere relative to most of Earth's history? Those are also deeper questions on the underlying science to ask. And so I find in many of these questions, we could talk about the border debate. We could talk about a number of the other issues, even in the gender ideology debates, where I think conservatives often will conflate those different questions, because we know in our gut what the right answer is, what the truth is. But sometimes if our goal is to bring, as my goal here is, friends at the dinner table along, we can actually do better by understanding which of those strands a particular audience on the other side would find most persuasive or is most receptive to, and actually use that rather than the amalgam of the general point that sometimes we make in our political discourse.